The skies over the Gulf do not sleep anymore. On the night of February 28, 2026, following the coordinated U.S.-Israeli strikes on Iran, the Islamic Republic launched what would become a multi-day, relentless campaign of missile and drone strikes across the Arabian Gulf. What followed was not simply retaliation, it was the unveiling of a new kind of war, one that the most powerful military in the world had not fully prepared for. Not because America lacked weapons, but because the weapons Iran was using cost almost nothing, and the weapons America needed to stop them cost almost everything. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps declared that all U.S. assets throughout the region were legitimate targets, and warned the operation would continue relentlessly until the enemy was decisively defeated. Those were not empty words. The barrages came night after night, wave after wave, like a drumbeat that would not stop. Tehran launched an unprecedented barrage of missiles and drones at multiple Gulf states. In the first 4 days of conflict, the United Arab Emirates suffered the highest number of strikes, both intercepted and successful, followed by Kuwait and Bahrain, all of which host major U.S. military installations. The strategy was clear to any soldier who understood what was happening. Iran was not trying to win in the traditional sense. It was trying to bleed its enemies slowly, to drain the coffers, to make defense more expensive than attack. Beneath the daily headlines of strikes and counterstrikes in the Middle East, war was being utterly transformed. In the first week of Tehran's retaliation campaign, drones accounted for about 71% of recorded strikes on Gulf states. The United Arab Emirates alone reportedly faced 1,422 detected drones and 246 missiles in just 8 days. The men and women stationed at bases across Abu Dhabi, Bahrain, and Qatar watched their radar screens fill with objects moving low and fast. Air defense systems that had been built to stop ballistic missiles from rogue states were now being asked to swat away swarms of cheap, expendable machines. The economics of war were being turned upside down. A Shahed-type drone often costs around $35,000. A Patriot interceptor costs about $4 million, which could buy over 100 drones. This is the new arithmetic of conflict. The attacker spends thousands, the defender spends millions, and even successful defense can become a form of attrition. Every drone that was shot out of the sky above Dubai or Manama represented not a victory but a slow leak in the American war chest. Iran had figured out something fundamental, that in a world of cheap autonomous weapons, the factory floor mattered more than the battlefield trophy. The first night set the tone for everything that followed. Iran launched the first wave of ballistic missiles and drones toward U.S. bases in Abu Dhabi, including Al Dhafra Air Base. UAE defenses intercepted most, but debris fell in a residential area near Zayed International Airport, killing 1 civilian and injuring 7 others from shrapnel and blasts. Loud explosions shook the Corniche, Al Dhafra, and Bateen districts, with smoke rising over the city. A Shahed-type drone reportedly struck near the Fairmont the Palm Hotel on Palm Jumeirah, causing a large explosion and fire. Dubai International Airport closed briefly while passengers and staff were directed to bomb shelters after defense systems alerted of incoming attacks. The sight of tourists sheltering underground in one of the world's most glamorous cities while Iranian drones burned above the skyline told the full story of how far this conflict had reached. A fire also broke out at the Ruwais industrial complex in Abu Dhabi, which houses the country's largest oil refinery. Abu Dhabi National Oil Company was forced to shut down a facility that would otherwise produce 922,000 barrels of oil per day. The war had arrived at the arteries of the global economy. For the first time in history, Iran attacked all 6 Gulf Cooperation Council countries: Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. For decades, the Gulf territory had remained largely insulated from direct Iranian fire. Since the tanker war of the late 1980s, Tehran had avoided openly targeting the region, relying instead on proxy groups. That calculation had now changed completely. Bahrain reported that a missile attack targeted the headquarters of the U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet in the capital, Manama. The government called it a treacherous attack and a blatant violation of the kingdom's sovereignty. Footage circulating on social media appeared to show an Iranian Shahed drone smashing through a tower block located near the headquarters, setting the building ablaze. Soldiers who had served in that building knew exactly what they were watching. The nerve center of American naval power in the Gulf had just been struck by a machine that cost less than a mid-range family car. Iran also reported striking Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, Ali Al Salem Air Base in Kuwait, Al Dhafra Air Base in the UAE, and the U.S. Navy Fifth Fleet headquarters in Bahrain. The geography of the assault showed discipline and planning. Iran was not flailing. It was mapping every American footprint in the region and systematically pressing on each one. By the time 3 weeks of conflict had passed, there had been 3,000 different projectiles, missiles and drones, fired at GCC countries by Iran. More than half had targeted the UAE alone, and yet the machines kept coming. That was the central military reality that commanders in Washington had to confront. Ukraine's top commander reported that Russia was by then producing 404 Shahed-type drones per day, with aims to eventually reach 1,000 per day. By contrast, Lockheed Martin produced about 600 Patriot interceptors in 2025 and hoped to scale to 2,000 by 2027. The numbers did not lie. Iran and its partners were building the tools of war faster than America could build the tools to stop them. The revolution was bigger than drones. It was really about a new military architecture, cheap autonomous systems, artificial intelligence-assisted targeting, commercial satellite imagery, resilient communications, integrated sensors and cyber tools all operating together. The aim was not merely to strike, it was to compress time, to find, decide, and hit faster than the enemy could move, hide, or recover. On the ground inside Iran's command structure, a serious crack had also begun to show. Despite President Pezeshkian's apology to neighboring states for the strikes and his direct order to the armed forces to stop, the Revolutionary Guards continued with the attacks, exposing a leadership rift within the Iranian government. The IRGC had taken on a life of its own, moving beyond the control of the civilian government. This was no longer a state conducting a military operation. This was a military conducting its own war. The IRGC stated that U.S. interests in the UAE, including ports, docks, and military locations, were legitimate targets, and urged residents to evacuate ports, docks, and U.S. military shelters to avoid civilian casualties. The language was calculated. It gave the impression of restraint while continuing an offensive that had already struck luxury hotels, international airports, financial districts, and oil refineries. The Gulf's ability to defend itself was constrained by the reality of asymmetric warfare. Mixed platforms, swarm tactics, and geographically dispersed attacks risked saturating air defenses, while prolonged conflict could strain the resupply of interceptors. Multi-layered defense systems had intercepted about half of the attacks, while drones had carried out the majority of successful hits. Half. In a war of attrition being waged at this scale, half meant the other half got through. Israeli analyst Danny Citrinowicz warned that this might be the war that would push Iran beyond the threshold toward a nuclear bomb. If that calculation proved correct, then everything the U.S. and Israel had done to degrade Iran's military had potentially accelerated the one threat that neither side wanted to confront directly. With drones out there, the battle is everywhere and soldiers will not get a respite. With human beings far from the battlefront, war might become easier to contemplate but also easier to deadlock. The men watching the radar screens every night in Abu Dhabi, Bahrain, and Qatar already knew this. The explosions were real, the fires were real, the math was real. Iran had not won this war, but it had changed what winning costs.